And the first one's from our friend Merlin Wendelboe, who says that half of the amendments in the Bill of Rights apply specifically to criminals and those suspected of crime. Under what justification, therefore, can the Second Amendment be suspended for ex-cons, and by the same justification cannot be protected against cruel and unusual punishment be suspended? How about the Fifth Amendment? How about all the others? Thou shalt not be infringed means at all. That's an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure I understand it, but I'll take a shot at it, Merlin. If I understand you correctly, you're using the example of Second Amendment being suspended for ex-cons, for felons cannot own firearms, is my understanding. And I think if you're making the point, I think you're saying, okay, well, if you're a felon and you've served your time and been released, I don't want to call it an honorable discharge, but you didn't escape from prison. Let's put it that way. If that's the case, then why? And you're not deprived of your First Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, and so on. Why would you be deprived of your Second? And that is an excellent argument. It is an excellent argument. And what makes this argument particularly good is it runs at the intersection between theory and practice. I think that's the thing I like most about it. This is the kind of thing that sits to me right in the twilight zone between theory and practice. So what I mean by that is, in theory, in terms of the philosophy, if a person has served their time, they have basically paid their debt to society, and there's no reason why they should not be allowed to have firearms, since none of their other rights are abridged or infringed upon. That's a theory, and that's the way I'd like to keep things. That's the way I think things should be. But sometimes we have to make, as I said just a moment ago before I even read this question, sometimes you have to understand that you live in the real world. And so the question then becomes, somebody who's committed a felony has, let's just leave the exceptions out, okay? People who maybe do something they're unaware of. Let's just leave that out. Let's talk about criminals. We know what a criminal is, and we know what a dead horse is, so gentlemen, pray let us cease flogging the latter. So a criminal commits some kind of violent crime, and he's convicted of a felony. He serves his time. He gets out. All of his other rights are restored. Why not his Second Amendment rights? In theory, they should come back. In practice, there are some serious questions about this. This is where you have to almost do a little bit of horse trading. And this is where your theory has to confront the real world. And on balance, me personally, I think it's probably appropriate that they're banned from owning firearms. And I would restrict that to people who had committed some kind of an assault or had a weapon on them. In other words, if they had hurt somebody with or without a weapon, or if they'd committed a crime with a weapon and bandied it about, then either one of those two cases tell me that this person is probably not somebody we can risk trusting. Because this is where the philosophical argument gets really interesting, because, again, I hadn't read the question in advance. And so on what grounds are we denying them their Second Amendment right? Well, we'd be denying it on the same grounds that we denied them their freedom when they were put in jail in the first place, right? They violated a criminal code, and we have the freedom to move around, and we have all these other freedoms, but when you are in prison, those freedoms are taken away from you. You don't have the freedom of movement anymore, and so on. And so, in a way, it seems to me, I don't think necessarily for every felon, but as I said, if I was writing the law, where I'm going now with it is that if the felony was either violence towards another person, or a gun was used in the felony, or both, certainly both, then in those cases you wouldn't regain your right for a firearm. Or perhaps you wouldn't for 10 years or whatever. I would just consider it to be a probationary period. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe you just have to do an ongoing probation as far as firearms are concerned, and as long as you don't get yourself into any kind of trouble at all after that, then maybe you'd release it. Now, look, the thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about, one of the things I want to work into this firewall I just told you about, is this idea of theory. and how the Bolsheviks were all theorists, and you were a Leninist, or you're a Trotskyist, or you were a Bakarinite, or you were a right Trotskyist, or you were a net man, and everything was theory, and this revolution was brought about by intellectuals who did nothing but talk about things and talk about theories. And Marxism, all of Marxism is this theory that just doesn't work. And so while it's nice to have this theory, there comes a point when you have to realize that there are some people that just are not going to play by the rules. And since they're not willing to play by the rules, they're not entitled to be protected by the rules. I think that's probably where I would go with that. I think I would probably say the rights that you talk about are rights guaranteed to American citizens, and we're not taking away your American citizenship. But you have basically violated the social compact, right, by committing a crime. We didn't just randomly say no guns for you. And that's kind of where you'd be in terms of comfort level. But the reality of the situation, of course, is that law-abiding people don't break the law by definition. But in terms of what that means in reality is the vast number, and I mean the huge number, of people who have legally bought firearms never use them in crimes. Because if you legally buy a firearm and go to the trouble to do that, you strike me as a person who's understood that crime is for losers, and that and it's not like a slogan, crime is for losers. A crime is for people who are either so ignorant or so broken on some level, emotionally, whatever. And this could be a result of their environment. I'm happy to admit that. But the point is, if you become a criminal, you've done so because for whatever reason, you understand that playing by the rules is not going to get you where you want to be. That's your belief. It's not true, but that's your belief. And so you think that the reward justifies the risk. Interesting spin-off of this is the idea that in inner cities today, that the drug dealers are in fact the most motivated and the most intelligent people in the community, because since there is no economy in so many of these areas, they are the ones who are out there doing the entrepreneurialism. But anyway, I think that's basically it. If I had to, decide, Merlin, and then I could, of course, just go right down the other way and say, hey, what about your other rights? Your other rights are not restricted. That's a great argument. I know that when I come to a conflict between theory and practice, my head goes to theory and my heart goes to practice. My head tells me that those Second Amendment rights should be restored, and then my heart tells me that if I do that, that's going to be a problem. And there is a justification for it. It's not like, as I said, it's not random. It's based on the decision of the person that committed the felony. That's a very good question, and the kind of thing that sparks a lot of thinking for people smarter than me. All right.